Two brothers are lost in the woods. They are trying to find their way home. Along the way, they meet a bluebird, a tea mogul, Adelaide, the good woman of the pasture, that no-good Jimmy Brown, the highwayman, and the beast. They don't know how they got lost, or how long they've been lost. They only know that they need to get home. So what's all this about then?
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
Hello and welcome back to Spooky Month. Every Friday for the month of October, I will be talking about something of the spooky variety. Today, we'll be talking about one of my all-time favorite fall traditions, Over the Garden Wall. Spoilers for the whole thing basically throughout, this entire video. You have been warned. Over the Garden Wall is a 2014 animated miniseries from Cartoon Network. The story follows brothers Wirt and Greg as they try to find their way out of the unknown, all while avoiding the clutches of the beast. Everything from the amazing voice cast to the sweeping scores to the idyllic autumn setting make Over the Garden Wall a fall must-watch. The story explains just enough to be understandable, but it also leaves enough to the imagination that it can mean any number of things to any number of people. For that reason, the miniseries has been analyzed to hell and back on ye old YouTube. But despite all that, we're gonna do it again anyways. Oops! Before we get into the juicy stuff, there is a surface level canon explanation for the whole story. The boys jumped over a cemetery wall and onto the path of an oncoming train on Halloween night. They leap out of the way of the train only to fall down a hill into a creek, rendering them unconscious. The explanation is that they've been unconscious the entire time. But it doesn't really answer the "but what did it all mean?" question, in my opinion. So, let's talk about some possible readings of Patrick McHale's Over the Garden Wall. When I first saw Over the Garden Wall in 2015-ish, I 100% read it as a coming-of-age story. The main protagonist, Wirt, is about 14 to 16 years old, right on the cusp of adulthood. He's lost in the woods, just like he's lost trying to navigate his way into the adult world.
But, well, I have this crush on this girl.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
That's all?
And I think about her a lot, and I play clarinet.
Wirt, you gotta be kidding me.
And I secretly whisper poetry to myself in my room at night.
Wirt, that stuff's not weird. Those are just, well, the poetry thing is weird.
He's melodramatic and sensitive and sometimes mean to his little brother, just like any teen trying to figure out who they're supposed to be in the world. The beast marks Wirt as his primary target, according to this interpretation, because of his precarious positioning as an adolescent. He's most at risk for losing whatever kind of childlike innocence he has left, making him an easy target for the burden of the beast. Just a reminder that I warned you about spoilers earlier. Here's some. You see, the beast carries his own soul in a lantern, and he's been seeking a new lantern bearer. This is the beast's burden, and Wirt's newfound desire to act grown up, whatever that means, which he demonstrates multiple times throughout the show, makes him the perfect candidate. I was in college when I first watched the show, and as a young adult, at least to me, the burden of the lantern was very obviously the burden of adulthood. Growing up can be hard for a lot of us. Many of us can relate to bad poetry and awkward crushes, but let's move on to a darker interpretation. Hey, are Wirt and Greg, dead? Well, obviously they don't stay dead. It's a kid's show, for Christ's sake. But, were they dead? The way people can be clinically dead before being revived after a few seconds? That's a thing, right? And if they were dead, were they in the Inferno? Like Dante, Virgil, you know. Here's the evidence. If you aren't aware, the Inferno is an epic poem composed by the poet Dante, which chronicles his journey with his friend and fellow poet Virgil into the various circles of hell. Our first piece of evidence that the brothers may be in the Inferno is that Wirt himself is a poet, much like Dante. He travels with a bluebird intentionally named Beatrice after the character in the Inferno. There's a character in the Inferno named Beatrice. And Patrick McHale has said that that was intentional. Why am I explaining myself more than just saying the sentence? The younger brother Greg is also kind of a poet, composing little songs and rhymes throughout the show.
But as for where she is where we will go. To Adelaide, to Adelaide. Come on and join the Adelaide parade.
No.
Adelaide, to Adelaide. Let's go to Adelaide's house. I need to fix that last part.
This makes him a bit like the Virgil of the story. The story starts in a forest, just like Dante and Virgil's descent into the Inferno begins in a forest. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that each of the 9 episodes following the first can pretty easily be connected to a layer of hell. Pottsfield in episode 2 represents the decision travelers have to make in limbo: stay here and rest, or keep pressing forward. In the 3rd episode, Mrs. Langtry's obsession with her scorned lover, Jimmy Brown, represents the lust of the 2nd layer of hell. Episode 4 finds the boys in a tavern, where the patrons can be seen engaging in acts of gluttony. Quincy Endicott in episode 5 is not only dead, but obsessed with the acclamation of wealth. The 4th layer, greed. The 5th circle is concerned with anger and sorrow. It's also where lost souls are damned to drown in the river Styx. Episode 6 opens on a riverboat, and ends with Wirt overcome with sorrow over his seemingly meaningless journey. Circle 6 concerns itself with heresy. Episode 7 features witches, the very embodiment of heresy. Episode 8 tackles the 7th circle, violence, by playing out a war between the people of Cloud City and the Old North Wind. Wirt is a fraud. We learn in episode 9 that his weird little gnome outfit he's been wearing has been a makeshift Halloween costume the entire time. We also learn that the Jason Funderburger that he keeps bringing up as his romantic rival is not really the stud muffin that Wirt has been making him out to be. The 8th layer of hell deals with fraud, and there's no better setting for that than Halloween night. The final episode takes place where the story began, in the woods surrounding the old grist mill. The Inferno also ends where it begins. The Beast is, well, literally called the Beast. He's obviously the devil. Wirt and Greg have their final showdown with the Beast in the 9th level, Treachery. Another thing to mention here is the use of the song Old Black Train by the Blasting Company. The song is played as the boys leap out of the way of the oncoming train in episode 9 that kickstarts the whole story. The Old Black Train has historically been a way of referring to death in folk music. Where this train is going, you can't come back from. This is probably the most canon interpretation of the story. Probably. Maybe. Who knows? This one kind of connects to the coming-of-age narrative. Wirt is becoming an adult, but he isn't one quite yet. He's not yet completely submissive to the system like a good adult ought to be. In the final episode, the Beast tells Wirt that he must carry the lantern, that it's the only way to save Greg's soul. At first, it seems like he's going to follow orders, be the pushover he's been seen to be before. Specifically in episode 3, Schooltown Follies, where Beatrice repeatedly calls him out for this behavior.
Greg, don't you want to be more like your brother? Just always doing what you're told?
Huh?
Just a pathetic pushover who relies on others to make all his decisions?
Hey, what? I'm not a pushover.
Hold on, Wirt, let me get to my point.
Fine.
See, Greg? No willpower whatsoever.
But instead, he steps back and says,
That's dumb. What?
he started questioning the intentions of those more powerful than him while he's still young enough to do so. The previous lantern bearer, the woodsman, is already a full-grown adult, trapped in the thralls of society. Wirt, however, is still young and willing to call out the status quo when it doesn't make sense. This is a kid finally finding his confidence, and his voice within that confidence. According to this reading, Over the Garden Wall is a show about finding your voice, and using that voice to speak out about the wrong you see in the world.
And, I met this helpful woodsman who told us which direction to go to avoid the beast.
It's the beast.
Oh, you guys have heard of the beast too?
We all know the beast, Pilgrim.
The Pilgrim's Progress is another piece of religious allegory like the Inferno. However, while the Inferno deals with a journey into hell, the Pilgrim's Progress deals with a journey into salvation. For those uninitiated, Pilgrim's Progress follows a character literally named Christian as he journeys from his hometown, City of Destruction, meant to represent the world, to the Celestial City, meant to be heaven. Like the Inferno, it can be linked to Over the Garden Wall and Greg and Wirt's... Greg and Wirt? I've never said it like that before, instead of Wirt and Greg. And Wirt and Greg's journey through the unknown. The boys' journey towards salvation, towards becoming good people, is filled with trials and enemies, just like the protagonists in the Pilgrim's Progress. At the start of their adventure, they're given directions from the woodsman, who could be interpreted as the evangelist at the beginning of Pilgrim's Progress, who sends Christian on his way to the Celestial City. They are relentlessly pursued by the Beast, who, as I already mentioned, is a pretty obvious stand-in for Satan, or evil temptations in this case. It's all about the journey. As the great philosopher Miley Cyrus once said, it's the climb. Growing into and becoming a good person is not an easy journey. But just as the pilgrim in his progress grew more grounded in his morals during his journey, despite many setbacks, so did Greg and his half-brother Wirt, in the end rejecting the temptation of the beast.
My name is Wirt, and his name is Greg. We're related cause my mom remarried and then gave birth to him with my stepdad.
Wirt seems to bring up that Greg is only his half-brother quite a bit. It's not, like, excessive, but it's enough that it's noticeable. It seems that throughout the story, the older brother is having a difficult time accepting Greg as a permanent part of his family. At the beginning of the story, the woodsman tells Wirt that as the eldest child, he is responsible for not only his actions, but the actions of his younger brother. Wirt responds hesitantly, not quite ready to accept the role of older brother. In episode 9, before the inciting incident with the train that we talked about, Wirt is irritated with Greg for getting in the way of his romantic pursuits. After jumping over the titular garden wall, Wirt yells out, "Once again, you ruin my life." Greg responds, "Who? Me?" In a very telling moment, Wirt retorts, "You and your stupid dad always prodding me to join marching band." This tells us a few things about Wirt's relationship with his stepdad and half-brother. Mainly that he still views them as outsiders, intruding on his life. He doesn't want them telling him how to live, just like he doesn't want the responsibility of a younger brother. Near the end of the story, when Wirt has seemingly accepted defeat, he tells Greg that he's in charge now. Wirt does not want to be the leader anymore. He doesn't want to be the eldest child. When you look at it that way, Over the Garden Wall is kind of about Wirt's gradual acceptance of Greg into his family. He begins the story by not only putting his own life, but also the life of his younger brother at risk because of his unwillingness to accept these new members into his family. But by the end of the story, he's completely willing to sacrifice his own soul to save Greg's. Greg goes from being nothing but an annoyance in Wirt's life to becoming an important part of his inner circle who he loves and would literally give his life for. Pretend this is a better segue into the conclusion. There isn't a right way to interpret Over the Garden Wall, and that's part of the magic of it. These were just a few of the ways you could read the story, and there's no reason that they can't overlap. It can be the Inferno and a coming-of-age story and a story about mixed families all at the same time. No matter how you read Over the Garden Wall, there's no denying that it's a beautiful piece of fiction. If you haven't watched it yet, what are you doing watching this? I just spoiled, like, the whole thing. Hurry, go watch it. Go remedy the situation. Oh my god. Okay, so one last thing. Literally, while eating lunch before filming this, I was watching Ryan Hollinger's new video on the Lighthouse, and it actually kind of relates to what I'm trying to say here about Over the Garden Wall. In terms of art being for the viewer to interpret, I just keep dancing around that death of the author question, huh? So I'm gonna link that below. This was a big one. Well, not big in terms of other video essays, or even really in terms of length, but compared to like what I usually do and I guess like complexity, I don't know, it felt like a big one. I don't know. I hope you enjoyed it. Alas, next week, Spooky Month must come to a close, and we will be talking about Halloween, both the John Carpenter movie and the holiday. So be sure to subscribe if you are interested in seeing that. If you liked this video, be sure to do the liking, the sharing, the commenting, the subscribing, etc., etc. If you didn't like it, may I suggest watching it again at double speed? That way, it'll go by quicker. By everything from the amusing